Do you remember the last time the world changed for you overnight? Well, for me, it happened many, many years ago. And at that time, I was studying just like you all in a school in Delhi. And I was giving my board exams of the 12th standard. And as many would have guessed that I wasn't really the best of student. I was struggling with my psychology exam. That was the last board exam that I was giving. And I wanted to do everything else but study. So, I came across an article in the Indian Express, and I read a father who was grieving the death of her daughter. And the daughter was Priyadarshini Mattu. You might have heard about it, or probably you can go back and read about it. Priyadarshini Mattu was a Delhi University law student who, just like you all, had dreams. She wanted to become a lawyer. She wanted to make name for herself, her family, and become a big name in the nation. But unfortunately, on one fine day in the mid-90s, while she was at the Delhi University and going back home, she was raped and she was murdered. And for 10 years, the person who did that crime was unfortunately let free. The local court in Delhi said that though we know that this is the man who has committed this crime, we let him free because there's no evidence against him. I read this article of this grieving father saying that when will the wheels of justice really move? I was a 16-year-old. I didn't know what to do. This was not a time of social media. There was no Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, or even X. So I had limited options. And at the same time, I wasn't somebody who would come to the stage and speak. I was a shy kid. I didn't know how to muster courage to speak up. But at that particular time, I decided that something needs to be done. Of course, I had that psychology exam that I was waiting to give. But I decided to write a petition to the President of India and the Chief Justice of India. Collect signatures. That's the least that I could do. And somehow that gained traction. And that signature campaign led to a massive Justice for Priyadarshini Mattu campaign just when I was 16 years old. And that became my claim to fame. That is the first instance, perhaps, in my life, while I was awake, that there were shifting stands. Rapes and murders were happening. But here was a campaign that I was leading as a 16 or a 17-year-old, asking the judiciary, the investigative agencies, the government to really take call to action, to understand that the nation's conscience had shaken and something had to be done. And finally, thousands of people came out. We had protests all across Delhi. And finally, the Delhi High Court took suo motu cognizance, and we had justice in that particular case after more than 10 years. The person who committed the crime was given death sentence. But this is just one example of how life really changes. I was sitting just like you all in my school at that particular time. Perhaps all of you are much more aware today. You're on social media, you read a lot, you consume a lot of videos. At that particular time, I was clueless. I didn't know what to do. I always wanted to become a journalist, yes, but I wanted to join the print media, never the television, because I had stage fright. I was scared to come out in the public in front of hundreds of people. So it takes a lot of courage. But you remember that life changes and nothing remains familiar. Nothing remains, there's no status quo always. Everything changes. You remember just 4 or 5 years back when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and we were not sitting like this. We were in front of a screen. There was teacher on the other side, and there were students on this side. You were stuck in the four walls, and you didn't know how to come out of it. You just didn't know what is the way out. But life changes again. We have COVID-19 pandemic before us, but it's a learning experience. We've come out of it. We've come out victorious. But life does change. And often we are at a crossroads. And this crossroads tells us that there are only two ways. Either we will complain. We will continuously complain and remain seated in our positions, or The other tougher way out is to find the solution, to raise questions, to in fact go an extra mile and question and try to see where you can be part of the larger change that you actually dream about. Many, many years ago, while I was staying at a place called Asiad Village in New Delhi, I was really young, but I found this person, very intriguing person, who was my neighbor in Delhi for many, many years. And one fine day, I knew because I went out with my grandfather for morning or evening walks, and I used to greet him, and there used to be a lot of security around this person. So I didn't really know who this is. But finally, I came to know that that person was APJ Abdul Kalam. And, I went to congratulate him when he was the president. I think I would have been in middle school at that particular time. And he told me something that, again, has remained with me always. And he told me, dream, dream, dream. Dreams transform thoughts into action. And I have kept this axiom with me always, always. It's not difficult to dream. It is, of course, difficult to chart out that path to achieve that dream. But if you don't dream, if you don't think, if you don't actually visualize what your aim in life is, how will you chart out that way? So, I decided that I will become that journalist. But many, many years ago again, there was something that happened in my life that changed everything. Not just with me, but with my family and with my entire community. I hail from Kashmir. I was born in Kashmir, but I was born amid a very unfortunate, tragic, and a violent conflict. And I was just about 8 or 9 months old when there was a lot of killings, selective killings that happened. And midnight, my family had to leave our homes in Kashmir and stay in a camp in Jammu. So we stayed in a place which was almost like a garage or a cow shed, more than a dozen people out there for a few months. And I was just about 9 months old, not even a year old. I celebrated my first birthday in a refugee camp. And thereafter, my parents had the courage to move to Delhi and rebuild our life completely. So the initial years of my life, my cousins joke that, Aditya, you haven't seen a childhood. Because I've always seen my parents struggle, not make me feel the discomfort of this life that we're building from scratch. So again, there were these shifting sands in my life just as I was born. There was terrorism, there was violence, there was struggle to begin life again. But my parents did everything possible. Both were scholars, historians, both had PhDs, and they rebuilt their lives. They had sack of books on their shoulders, and they used to go from one place to other, from one library to the other publisher to in fact sell those books. And here I am in front of you. So that particular case of Priyadarshini Mattu was one life changer, and the other hand was the 1990 experience of this forced exodus. And looking at my parents, having such a difficult life, but not even once complaining, not even once begging before the government or authorities or anyone to help us, but to chart out their own ways even through the toughest of times. And that carved the way, that actually put the foundation and the roots of my own life. So often people ask me that, why did you actually become a journalist? I became a journalist because I experienced that when we suffered, nobody told our story. Nobody cared to ask that question to the government or to whoever was in power, that here is a community which is suffering. Here are people who are suffering. Here are victims of terrorism. And nobody actually became a voice. So I decided at that point in time that somebody had to take that road to actually become the voice of the voiceless. And hence began my journey as a journalist. But then, again, another crossroads came once when I was in Iraq in 2014. You've heard of the ISIS, the terror group. And the ISIS had kidnapped more than 80 Indians, 40 nurses and 40 Indian laborers from Punjab. And I was tasked, I was just about 24 years old, and I went to Iraq and Jordan and the Jordan-Iraq-Syria border to cover that entire scenario. And if there was an international war correspondent standing here, apart from me, he would have been, talking about what an experience that was. But I'll tell you very honestly, I was scared. I was scared to death that what will happen, because there were bombs going across, there were kidnappings that were happening, there were already Indians kidnapped, and here is another Indian who's actually venturing into this conflict zone. But at that time, again, I thought that what is so different that I am here? Why am I here? And there must be a reason. The reason was, of course, that I had to narrate that story, not sitting in New Delhi, not sitting elsewhere, but to be in the thick of action and tell the people that here are the people who need our support, who need their story to be told, and the world to unite behind them. So I think my focus in life continuously has been, of course, to have that courage of conviction, to have that dream so that you can change and be a part of that entire change. I spoke about that Priyadarshini Mattu case. Today, it's been 20 years almost to that day, 18, 19 years. And now, unfortunately, the government, or at least the courts, are saying that they will release that convict, Santosh Kumar Singh, who actually committed rape and murder because of good behavior or good conduct. And just before I came here a couple of days ago, I met the Home Minister of Delhi and the Law Minister to ask them these questions, not just as a journalist, but as a concerned citizen. That what is the message that we are trying to convey to the society? At a time when there are continuous rapes and murders, and of course sexual assault, and what all that's been happening against girls, against women in the country, when there hasn't been enough precedent that has been set, a remarkable step that the government can take to completely not just spread awareness, but to set a precedent that this cannot be tolerated. At a time you're trying to release a rapist and a murderer for good conduct? Give me a break. So I hope that the government changes their stance on this particular issue. But I will just end by saying this one message to you all, that it's not difficult to dream, and it's not always difficult to stand alone. If you are standing alone, I will urge you that that is an opportunity. I have almost always stood alone in life. Be it in 1990s when my parents were alone and I didn't know what to do, and I took courage out of their courage. I took inspiration from their inspiration. I took the path ahead in life, learning from their experiences. So you all have your family members, you all have your parents, you have your grandparents. Know their story, know their courage, know their struggles, to understand and take inspiration from what to do, what not to do, and what to do much better. I take inspiration each day, possibly, from my parents, from my grandparents, whatever they are left behind, stories, anecdotes, whatnot. Today, of course, the times are changed. You are in your classrooms learning about artificial intelligence, about blockchains, about the disruptions that are happening all across. And these disruptions will happen. Nothing familiar will remain. You will not remain in your classrooms, in your houses, and whatever you have been witnessing all across, that will not remain the same. Every possible month, every possible year, things will continuously change. But that is an opportunity. That is an opportunity to be a disruptor. That is an opportunity to, in fact, carve your own way in your own mind of how you want to do it. Even if you are alone, even if your friends, your peers, your family are not standing with you, nobody stood with me. When I started that Priyadarshini Mattu campaign, my parents were scared. They were shit scared. They didn't know, this 16-year-old boy, he has nothing better to do in life, he's not studying. Why is he starting this campaign? This person who he's going against is the son of a DGP. And I had threat to my life at that particular time, which I did not think about, maybe because of my innocence. But years later, when I continuously have been reporting against terrorism in Kashmir, recently Operation Sindoor in Pakistan, Khalistani terrorism, whatnot, I have to carry security with me. I get threats every possible day. But that should not deter you. If you have a resolve in your mind, if you have that conviction of courage, then certainly you can carve out that way. My story is as a journalist. Tomorrow, your story can be as a bureaucrat, as a diplomat, as somebody who creates a new pathway, a new opportunity for millions out there in life. So never be scared, never be afraid of standing alone. And that will be my message to you all as I end this talk. Thank you very much.